Before God called me into the Episcopal Church, I was a college campus minister with students who had a whole lot more time than money. And because hanging out together was free, we hung out together a lot. During the day on campus in the student center, and in the evenings off campus at my apartment, where several times a week, several friends would show up unannounced at supper time. And I got really good at stretching whatever loaves and fishes I happened to have to feed the multitude. And when I became a youth minister at an Episcopal church, I kept my door and my table open to whomever showed up, though teenagers aren't as mobile as college students, and they can usually find a free meal at home rather than have to forage around in the neighborhood. But I still never knew exactly how many might be around my table on any given evening. Now, a key element in those several years of unpredictable hospitality was the fact that I was single. So anyone who came over to eat understood they did so at their own risk. Yeah, I mean, what's a few dust bunnies among friends? And the place never looked any worse after the teenagers left than before they got there. My philosophy was, come on over. It's a party. Then I got married. Why are you laughing? What's so funny? My wife at the time, bless her heart, was a really good sport about my openness to guests and my blindness to the mess. But it didn't take long for me to realize that my walking in the door at supper time with a carload of hungry teenagers without warning was not the best beginning for a romantic evening. Now, I've discovered since then that my former wife is not the only one who likes a little notice before guests arrive, which is why I will always call before I come visit any of you unless you're in the hospital. And that's why I never ask for a tour of your home when I get there. I know many of us have strategic doors that we keep closed when company comes over. Debbie and I certainly do, and it's not to keep the dog out of the den because we don't have a dog. So just imagine how Sarah felt today when Abraham sticks his head in the tent with the news, hey, honey, we've got company, and oh, I think one of them's God. I can just hear her now. Oh, my God. And one of the guests says, yes. Now, what would you do if you answered a knock at the door expecting one of the neighborhood kids, or at worst, a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses, and it was God and two of his friends? How many doors would you need to strategically close? What would you want to rake off the coffee table, or sweep under the rug, or pick up from the floor, or wipe clean in the bathroom? See, some of us keep our homes spotless because we just know that someone from Southern Living magazine is going to show up any minute and want to take pictures. But most of us don't do that. And I would dare say that Sarah and Abraham didn't. They live in a tent with flocks of sheep and herds of cattle and camels, and we think our kids make a mess. They weren't expecting the guys from Desert Living magazine that day, much less God and two of his friends. So understandably, they go into hyperdrive. Sarah flies into kneading and baking bread. Abraham sends a servant to butcher and roast a cow. And Abe offers his guests what he has ready at the time: a bowl of nice, warm, curdly, tent temperature yogurt. Doesn't that make your mouth water? It's important to keep a supply of dairy treats at all times for any unexpected guests, which is why in the Messiah family there is always ice cream somewhere on the campus, especially tonight, because we never know when God might show up to visit. It is, after all, his house. But if God came to visit, how would we know it's God? Now, sometimes it's pretty obvious, like when Jesus and his disciples show up at Mary and Martha's house. And we're feeling sorry for Abraham and Sarah because God brought two of his friends. Jesus brought 12. But most of the time when God visits, it's not that obvious, like with Sarah and Abraham today. Abraham's sitting in the doorway of his tent trying to beat the heat. And he looks up and he sees three guys standing nearby. He runs out to meet them. And notice where he invites them: into the shade under a tree, not into the tent. Abraham's married. He knew better than that. Even if this guest might be God. Now, why did Abraham make such a fuss over these guys? Now, was it just Middle Eastern gracious hospitality? Or was Abraham just a really kind, generous, friendly guy, which he was, and that's why God chose him to be the father of faith? Or was it because Abraham listened to God enough to know his voice and loved God enough to feel his presence? So when Abraham sees this guy, he realizes, this is God. Now, if God came to visit any of us, would we recognize him? Have we listened to him enough in prayer to discern his voice? Have we spent enough time in the scriptures to know his ways? Do we love and desire him enough to look for him, to show up in our everyday life? Because he will. And when he does, sometimes he unmistakably looks like God. And sometimes he looks like Jesus and his friends. But sometimes he looks just like somebody standing out in the sun needing some shade. It would be bad to have God come visit and we miss him because we didn't realize who he was. But it would be even worse to have God come and visit and we blow him off or ignore him or mistreat him or are rude to him because we didn't realize who he was. So just to be safe, let's treat everyone as though they were God himself. Then, when it really is God, we won't go wrong. Which is why at the peace, I urge you to introduce yourself to someone you don't know because they might be God. But that assumes that God might come visit us someday. Why would he want to do that? Well, look at what God did when he visited Abraham and Sarah and Mary and Martha. Why did God want to visit them? Just to hang out. Just to be with them. Now, we think anytime God appears or speaks to us or touches us, it must be some earth-shakingly important occasion, like he's calling us to do some mission impossible or telling us the future of the world or healing somebody from cancer. But most of the time, God comes to us and speaks to us and touches us just because he loves us and wants to be with us. Look at his visit with Abraham and Sarah. God didn't just pop in, say something profound, and pop out. He was there for hours. Think how long it takes to mix a batch of dough and bake bread. Now, I had a bread machine. It took at least 4 hours to go from flour to dough to bread. And how long would it take to catch, butcher, and roast a cow? Now, they couldn't just run over to Publix and pick up some fried chicken or order DoorDash. So God and Abraham are standing around together. They're together for several hours, hanging out, slurping yogurt, smelling baking bread and barbecued beef, and telling stories and laughing and being friends. God visits us just because he wants to hang out with us, because he loves us. God visits because he wants to hang out with us and because he wants to bless us. Now, sometime during that several-hour conversation, the subject of children must have come up. Because 24 years before this story today, in Genesis chapter 12, God promises childless Abraham and Sarah that they will become a great nation, which one would assume requires having some children. Then 16 years before this story today, in Genesis chapter 15, God appears again. And Abraham suddenly mentions, you know, Lord, one of my servants is going to inherit everything I own because you haven't given us any kids yet. Hint, hint. And God answers, step outside, look up in the sky, count the stars if you can, because that's how many offspring you're going to have. And Abraham believes God and becomes the father of our faith. But here in Genesis chapter 18, 24 years after that first visit, Abraham and Sarah are still childless. And they ain't getting any younger. Abraham is 99 years old and Sarah is 89. And it's not that her biological clock quit ticking. God just keeps hitting the snooze button. So between bites of barbecue beef, God asked, "Where's Sarah?" "Over in the tent." "I'll be back about this time next year and she will have a son." Now, Sarah, good wife that she is back in the tent, politely letting the guys have their guy time. But her radar ear is picking up every word. And when God says that, she snorts with laughter and says, yeah, right. Mr. and Mrs. Wrinkles are going to have a kid. And God asks, "Why are you laughing? Don't you think I can do it?" And Sarah stammers, I didn't laugh. And God says, "Oh, yeah, you did." But he doesn't take back his promise. And a year later, in Genesis chapter 21, God answers their 25 years of prayer, and they have a son. And God says, "Name him Isaac," which means laughter. And some of us think God doesn't have a sense of humor. God visits us because he wants to bless us. God visits us because he wants to hang out with us, because he wants to bless us, and because he wants to call us deeper in faith, hope, and love. That's why God visited Abraham and Sarah, and that's why Jesus visits Mary and Martha today. Jesus loved Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus, and he loved hanging out with them, and they loved having Jesus and his friends over at their home. But as you can imagine, it takes some doing to whip up a meal for 13 hungry guys. And while Martha is bustling around the kitchen, Mary sits down at Jesus' feet to listen. And Martha gets miffed at her slacker sister and tells Jesus to send her back to the kitchen. But Jesus answers, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. But only one thing is really important right now, and that's what Mary has chosen. And I'm not going to take it away from her." Martha was doing important stuff, fixing food. But Mary was doing something even more important at that moment, listening to Jesus and growing in her faith, hope, and love. That's why God visited Abraham and Sarah. And that's why Jesus visited Mary and Martha. And that's why God wants to visit you and me, to hang out with us, to bless us, and to call us deeper in faith, hope, and love. So if God comes to visit you, and he will, how will we respond? Like Abraham, who ran out to meet him, welcomed him into the shade, and hung out and spent time with him? Or like Sarah, who hid from God in the tent, and when he tried to bless her, laughed in unbelief and then lied about it? Will we be like Mary, who sat at the feet of Jesus to listen and learn? Or like Martha, who was so busy doing what she thought was important, she missed what was really important, being with Jesus and his friends? God is visiting us right here and right now. This is, after all, his house. And he's here every Sunday to hang out with us, to bless us, and call us deeper in faith, hope, and love. Are we willing to relax and hang out with him? Or are we worrying about whatever we think we need to do later today or tomorrow or this week? Are we open to his blessing us, healing us, answering a prayer? Or is our expectation, God's not going to do anything anyways, so we're not disappointed when he doesn't? Are we listening for his voice and what he might want to say to us to call us deeper in faith, hope, and love? Or are we counting the minutes until we can go in peace? God visits us here every time we get together. And like he did with Abraham and Sarah and with Mary and Martha, God also wants to visit our homes every day, not to inspect them for tidiness, but just to be with us, to hang out with us, to bless us, and to call us deeper in faith, hope, and love. God wants to visit us always. Are we looking for him to show up? And are we ready and willing to host him when he arrives.